So maybe I'll start in a different place now that I have an opportunity. First of all, thank you, Anuj, for inviting me to do this. And thank you both, or all three of you, for coming. Really appreciate it. I started with this idea in, I guess was pretty clear to me that this is the direction we were going to be going. I think well before the spring break. So I started to think about this, and within my own practice, not university, I have to be honest, tried to get the university to do it, and they weren't interested. Different colleagues from other schools started talking about teaching in this time, like what you're teaching and when you're teaching it, and to whom you're teaching, and who are you. And I have to be honest, I thought about how could I make my class as easy as possible for my students. And it wasn't a very deep thought, it was more of a broad thought, like the easiest class you can do in 10 weeks. And I had a colleague who teaches at Cal State Fullerton, and he said he was going to put the whole thing of teaching acting aside, and it was going to be all about wellness. I wasn't going to talk about acting at all. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And I'm not going to do it, but the idea stuck with me. And then at another one of those meetings, one of the folks mentioned that she was really mindful that many of our students were infants or in childhood, or were somehow connected to 9/11 and the wars that we've been engaged in for their entire life. And that they were coming into adulthood during a plague. And she said she was knowledgeable of that and wondering what that had to do with the practice of teaching. And that was another thing that stuck with me in my easy class that I was planning to teach. And I had been aware of this little book of daily delights for a very long time. And I didn't own it, but I'd heard Ross Gay read, and I'd read bits of it online. And just before lots of stores closed, I decided to look for this book. And everywhere I went, or went online to look, because I shop with independent bookstores online, it was sold out everywhere. And then I found Barnes & Noble's had 2 copies left in their storehouse, and I ordered one, and I started to read it. And they're very short essays on many topics, but his guiding post is looking for delight. So I looked up delight, joy, and happiness, and I realized how different they were. They're not all the same thing. They don't mean the same thing. And the thing that stood out for me with delight and joy is that they're practices. And most of the definitions said that happiness was a general feeling of euphoria, but that delight and joy was something active, and active, I built that out thinking it's a practice, just like art, just like teaching. And I started to say, what if that's the window I climb through for my work for this quarter? So I brought this to my students who are in intermediate acting, and I said, we are going to write daily delights. Instead of our acting journal, where we're all thinking about being movie stars, we're gonna write about delight. And I will say for the first 2 weeks, it was very surface. And I kept speaking to the students and reminding them how much delight is akin to the practice of acting and really to the practice of teaching by extension. Delight is an ongoing questioning of where you are, what's happening around you, and it adds the feeling of how are your senses alive, and how are you perceiving information, and sort of deconstructing information, and what could be more useful for actors. So now I'll let you know, we're up to our 5th week, and they have turned these essays into little performances that are really stunning and really, really deep. A student who started out saying, everything's great. It's like, yeah, everything's great, except for I notice I cry a lot. And it is not his MO to own up to that and to be able to see that and also see that he could set that to music and find that there's something to hold on to that's delightful about that. Even the tears, the constant tears. Yeah, great. So I'll just let you know what my plan is for the next few moments. And I'm going to just honor the lineage of some of the thoughts. Some of them are mine, but some of them I've gathered out of this book I teach. It's called The Lucid Body, which is an exploration of the chakras. So we will explore some of the materials that are here. And I was lucky enough to meet and work with Mary Overly, who is actually the founder of Viewpoints, which is not well known because Anne Bogart, I'll just be honest, took it and ran with it. So most people think about Viewpoints through the lens of Anne Bogart, but Mary Overly is actually the founder of it. And it's a very theoretical practice. And the primary element of it is noticing, which I feel is the primary element of cultivating delight. So there's a little bit of Mary Overly splashed in what we'll explore, right? And before I go on any more, does anyone have anything they'd like to ask or make anything you've noticed?
In Ross Gay's book, is there a story about a tomato plant in an airport?
A fig plant?
A fig plant in an airport? Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I like that one.
It's a beautiful, and I'll tell you, I'll go on. So the book is sold out everywhere. I told Ross Gay that this is our acting book. We're using it in acting class. I sent him an email. And I said the students can't get it because the libraries doesn't have it, even if they could get it from there, and the library's closed. And we're not supposed to be asking students to spend extra money to get like a e-reader to be able to read it. And he contacted his publisher and they provided PDF. I didn't want to just like ignore his copyright and make copies. So they gave us the book for the class. because he thought, wow, that's a really great idea. I've never heard of anybody doing it. Let's do that. Yeah, so just let you know. Anyone else? Okay, great. So let's grab our mats. It's great if you can maybe bring your screen a little bit lower so that I can see you on your mat, but it's not entirely necessary. I think the main thing is for you to be able to hear me, and I think everyone can hear. Oh, I forgot to say, I'll say it when we get down to the floor. Okay. So, okay. We're going to start on the floor and do a little bit of work. And I've prepared an audio download for you. So I'm asking if you'll take the download, and if you can go outside, that's great, to engage in the exercises there. But if you can't, you can do it from wherever you are. And if it's challenging for you to be mobile with your legs today, that's also fine. You can do it from a seated position if that works for you. Great. So if you could come to a place where you feel your legs are comfortably crossed, sitting on the end of your mat with the long part of the mat behind you. And just see if you can feel your pelvis into the floor. And maybe to be a little bit more clear about that, thinking about the sits bones as the bottom of the pelvic bowl. Maybe you can feel a little boniness right underneath your butt connected to the floor. And maybe you can imagine your spine as little pebbles. And each pebble of your spine stacked on the other. So it's not a sensation of being rigid. The sensation that there is some movement there. And we'll pause here for a moment so everyone can be engaged at the same time. And allow yourself to take a breath. It's just find the breath. And just drop your chin to your chest. And see if you can just feel a stretch in the uppermost part of your back. You don't have to do anything about it or do anything to make it happen. Whatever happens is sufficient today. And bringing the hands to the floor. Still allowing your head to feel like it's draining off your spine. And with the next exhale, just walking the hands forward. And again, just as much as you can today. And see if you can feel the end of your spine that's closest to the floor, your tailbone, sort of reaching down to the floor, and the crown of your head like it's a water fountain. If there's water, it would be just flowing out of the crown of your head. And maybe there's a little more space between those pebbles. And with the next breath, let's walk both hands over to the right-hand side. And taking a breath there. And with the next breath, let's walk both hands over to the left-hand side. And again, it's just as much as you can do. You don't need to bring your hip off of the floor, anything like that. Just taking the breath into the body, maybe feeling a sensation of the ribs opening in the back. And bringing both hands to the center. Good. And with the next breath, sensing you are rolling yourself up one vertebra at a time. Again, until you feel like your head is balanced on top of those pebbles. And let's switch the cross. So whichever leg is in front is now the leg in the back. And just notice what happened to your breath when you did that, if you were still engaged in breathing or was there some kind of stopping. And let's drop your chin to the chest. Again, and feeling that stretch, subtle stretch. Maybe a little bit more release in the shoulders, a little space. And with the next exhale, let's walk both hands to the floor and walking the spine out, one vertebra at a time. And with the next exhale, let's walk both hands over towards the left-hand side. And let's breathe into the right ribs and the right hip. And with the next breath, let's walk both hands over towards the opposite side. And breathing into the ribs and into the hips. And with the next exhale, let's walk both hands to the center. And feel, you're connecting the tailbone sensation, feeling it's going in the direction of the floor, and a sensation of the crown of your head going towards the floor also. Noticing that sensation. With the next exhale, let's roll the spine up one vertebra at a time. Until you feel your head balanced on your spine, and then roll onto the mat in the way that's easiest for you. And let your feet be flat on the floor, your knees pointed towards the ceiling, feet hip distance apart. Good. So if you can, Anuj, can you roll onto the mat so that your back is on the mat? So you're lying down? Great. So those of you who aren't familiar with chakras. They are considered energy centers within the body. There are some traditions where this is practiced as part of a religious practice, just acknowledging that. However, I am approaching it as an energy that's within the body, not related to a religious practice. And I'd just like you to focus on the area of your pelvis. That was the same area that you were breathing into when you were in your seated position on the floor. And see if you can turn on your awareness to your sense of color and allow that area of your pelvis to be sensed as red. And a red that's nice for you. It's not as any special red except for one that you find useful to imagine. And this area of the pelvis is referred to as the root chakra. And with each breath, breathing into your root chakra, see if you can allow that color red to be more specific. And can you start to imagine with your senses, what are your unshakable beliefs? What do they look like? And with each breath, see if you can use the breath to make dynamic those that are your unshakable beliefs. And dynamic through your sensory awareness. Can you see, feel? Maybe these are people that you know. Maybe it's a quality. But I want you to see if you can engage in the idea that these are connected to what helps you to be firm. It's the thing that allows you to stay rooted. Maybe it's an early community or a current community. Seeing if you can imagine those. Maybe it's related to someone else that has a faith that sustain life. I recognize it's hard to imagine this sometimes. One more breath. Into your root chakra. And with the next breath, let's see if you can have a sensation that that root chakra feels balanced. It's not so strong that it turns your roots, make you a tyrant, someone who doesn't listen to anybody, who must be the leader. And it's not so unnoticeable that you are easily swayed. Just feels balanced. And with the next breath, I'd like you to imagine the spot just about 2 inches below your navel. And with each breath, seeing if you can imagine the color orange there. And thinking about that as a watery place, a sensation of nurturing and renewal. And a sensation of innocence. And see with your next few breaths if you can increase the color of this sacral chakra, orange. And with details, imagine what you see. Innocence. Maybe it's just color or a sensation of light or a feeling on your skin. Nurturing. Maybe it's a smell that you remember. What are the details? Be curious if you can. Another few breaths. Good. And allow the sacral chakra to come into a feeling of balance. Good. And with the next breath, let's bring your attention to the crown of your head. And notice at the crown of your head, if you can, the sensation of the color fuchsia. And think about the crown of the head, which is very soft when we're babies. When the bones and the skull are still willing to receive energy, feelings. And as we grow into adulthood, those bones start to solidify, almost with the sensation that nothing gets out or nothing gets in without a sense of control. It's also a place for a sense of wisdom and can also be a place where you listen in a different way. listening with a sense that the body is listening. And with the next several breaths, see if you can increase the sensation of that color, fuchsia. And see if you can have a sensation that the bones of the skull are returning to that softness that we were born with an intellect that's ready to receive. And ready to give. And willing to listen. And what are the images that you see within you surrounding those sensations of receiving, giving, listening? Another breath. And the next breath, sensing that this area of the crown of your head is coming into a sense of balance. Perfect. And if you would come up to sitting in a way that's easy for you and grab your instruments for writing and drawing. And if you would, make a drawing of the shape of the map of you. I always like to call it a map. That's the head and the arms and the legs. And once you've made that shape of you, let's revisit your roots. So maybe spending a little time in the area of your pelvis. And take a little time to draw some of those elements that are part of your unshakable beliefs. See what you can draw with your senses as to your intellect. And while you're connecting to your roots, maybe ask yourself, if you can respond to this question, another prompt. Why are we here on Earth? And as you come to a place to pause, I'd like you to take your focus to your sacral chakra. And see if you can imaginatively bring what nurtures you, what you nurture. What are your sensory ways of showing that on a page? What is this? What are the senses around innocence? And perhaps reflecting on the question of what is the point of suffering in an unknowable universe? And finally, for today, taking your imagination to your relationship with your crown. And see if you can sense sorely bring onto the page the synthesis of your experiences in your body that have become part of your intellectual relationship with yourself, others, and the planet. And with your senses, perhaps responding to what leads you in your senses. Is it, actually, I've misstated that, please excuse me. What leads you, thinking, thought, word, deed, prayer, or senses, or sensuality, your ears, your breath? And once you've completed that, if you can, when you're ready, just go to the place where you plan to walk and listen to the audio recording. Okay, great. I almost feel like I was listening. Let's give another few minutes for Hannah to return. Oh, okay, great. Um, I don't know if I should talk first or ask you about your experience first. I'll ask you about your experience. Right. But before I ask you about your experience, I'd like you to write down your or draw through your senses, and now thinking specifically about anything that sparked a feeling of, that's a delight. That's a delight. So I would like to do one more exercise, but before we do that, I would make room for any thoughts, reflections, experiences that you might like to share with the group. Either about the first exercise or the audio-based experience. But if you don't have anything to share, we can just move on.
I don't mind sharing. I am quite tickled with my drawing. I drew what I visualized during the colors and sensations exercise. And yeah, I found delight in a muskrat skull that's over here on my mantle on the shelf over there. So that was something that happened.
Poor muskrat. Which is interesting because I think it's really important to continue to think about delight as not happiness. It's this experience. There are so many things wrapped in delight. I'm planning to read the book, but I will. I'll read two things. Hole in the head. I love weird vernacular sayings that roll off the tongue and most likely have an interesting lineage, etymology, history. I can't think of one right now, but you know what I mean. Well, here's one. I need X, like I need a hole in the head. This means I do not need X. I need to be fired like I need a hole in the head. I need this cancer to resurface like I need a hole in the head. I need my kid to get back on heroin like I need a hole in my head. Interesting. Sad, I mean. That usage of simile often implies that a hole in the head administered by oneself might be a reasonable response. I'm thinking of that phrase because there was a recently released documentary called Hole in the Head about Vertis Hardiman, a man who grew up in Lyle's Station in southern Indiana, about 90 miles from where I'm writing this. Lyle Station was a town established by free blacks in 1800. It's charming. I went there for celebration day a few years back. Paper plates, corn on the cob, baked beans, barbecue. We moseyed through the town museum and talked to the locals. I learned today, watching the trailer from that documentary, and with some subsequent online research, that when Hardiman was a boy in 1920, he was one of a group of little children, little test subjects upon whom radiation experiments were performed. The experiments exposed these little children, like little test subjects, to severe levels of radiation, such that for the 5-year-old Hardiman, it burned a hole in his head. It might sound harsh to say it, But good Lord, Black people never let an official-looking white person dressed in a lab coat experiment on you or your children. Good Lord. If you're like me, you're picturing a scalp wound, like a cigarette or a scar burn, maybe peppering of them. Or you might even picture a patch of bald skin where the hair refuses to grow. But don't picture that. Picture a fist-sized crevice in the skull, flesh, fat, glistening as he removes that sock hat and the bandages beneath all the surrounding skin, charred pink and gray. I'm trying to remember the last day I have been reminded of the inconceivable violence Black people have endured in this country. When I talked to my friend Kia about struggling with paranoia, she said, "You'd have to be crazy not to be paranoid as a Black person in this country. Crazy not to think they want to put a hole in your head." It's interesting and useful to be cognizant, receive through your senses that daily delights is not a general feeling of joy. It's being able to look at the actual world and cultivate the delight to be found in that space. Are there any other thoughts you might like to share?
I'm reminded.
Sorry, go ahead.
Please.
For me, just opening the door and actually going outside and walking on the wet grass and just making that choice to actually leave this confined space and go outside was, because I mean, I had my phone on, and I was just, and all these people are walking around, and at first I felt a little self-conscious just being in my body for whatever reason. And so for me, just having that switch and kind of letting myself do this was the moment of delight, I think. Like giving myself permission to do it.
And what were you able to say, oh, these are the senses that are alive in my body? How do I feel that as a sensory? I was thinking a little bit about how actors use the body to create performance through an ongoing, and I like to use the word kneading of the senses. So it's like that crown of the head doesn't get, hard. We're constantly making space within the body to receive. So I'm wondering if there were any places you felt something on your cheek, or maybe, what did you feel?
On my feet, because I walked out barefoot and I walked into the grass and it was wet, and I just walked around in the grass and got my feet entirely wet. And it really helped me, because so much of the last few weeks has been in the head and just thinking and reading. And as much as I try to go outside and do physical things, actually I haven't done anything in the last 3 days like this. Go out and actually look at the wildflower, like just having a flash of color, looking down at the grass and seeing these yellow flowers and things that are always there, but I just walk past and ignore and don't pay attention to often. Yeah, I think those were the senses that, like, not getting away from the head and into the wind on my back or on my neck, and the colors flashing, the wetness on my feet kind of helps get away from the head into the body.
And I'm wondering if you could think about that as maybe literally changing your point of view. Like you're looking I've actually changed the point of view to see if we
Yeah.
can kind of disrupt the, you know, the horse of, or the train of the every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There was a certain heaviness. This morning I was feeling very tired and I was waking up, and then the first exercise was a little more difficult, especially the part about innocence was very hard. Yeah, but I think going outside in some sense kind of allowed me to access some, I can't articulate it, but yeah, but it made more sense when I was outside, like in the sun, and yeah, and not in the brain, but in the body.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow innocence made more sense.
Just wanted to pick up on what you said about the challenge of innocence. And again, it's something, maybe many different ways of experiencing innocence. I have a habit of saying hello to people. And I would say 99% of the time when I say hello to people in Davis, they don't say hello back. And I think it's because they can't see innocence or non-armor of this frame. So when I'm thinking about innocence, and even in the thinking about the teaching practice, I often think of my students as innocent, because that is a way I can allow a conversation when it's sometimes challenging. And by conversation, I mean being with them, engaging with them, when sometimes they're wanting to resist, or I'm wanting to resist, that almost like thinking of that like a delight, being able to see someone's innocence and not see them as a collection of media images or cultural beliefs, as an innocent, no agenda. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay. All right. Great. Let's just, actually, we only have 5 more minutes. So I'm not going to, the other exercise would take a bit longer than that. And I have a faculty thing at noon. So I'm just going to, I don't want to rush into that either. So I would like to just, I'm just going to say this. Part of my teaching practice is to encourage my students to write by hand, thinking about that as a somatic practice, thinking about writing as a type of drawing and a way of connecting the body to the intellect, and sort of maybe kind of taking the armor off of the writing on this, with the body as stiff as possible. And writing by hand. Who knew? Ross Gay thinks the same thing as I do. I love this story of Derek Walcott asking his graduate poetry workshop on the first day they composed by hand or computer. As I recall, about half the class raised their hand when he said the computer. I did not know him. But I did sit in on a workshop he held in a college shortly after he won the Nobel Prize, and I was both mesmerized and touched, terrified by his mellifluous and curt voice, lilting like a beach rose, all fragrant and thorny. All the senses that he's noticed around that. He said, with almost no affect, which is itself an affect, the six of you can leave my workshop. And just like that, and just like you would have, they gathered their things and started down the hall, probably wondering if Pinsky had any seats open in his class. Before they got too far, he called them back. The fragrant part of the rose. Come on, come on. I'm just making a point. What was the point? Prose. I'm skipping. Prose, though often I write on the computer, piling sentences up quickly and cutting and pasting and deleting whole paragraphs without thinking anything of it. For these essays, though, I decided I'd write by hand, mostly with smallish pens. I can tell you a few things. First, the pen and the hand behind the pen is a digressive beast. It craves, in my experience anyway, wending thought and crafting images, conjuring syntax. On the other hand, the process of writing is made disappearable by the delete button, makes a whole part of the experience of writing, which is the production of a good deal of florid flotsam and jetsam. All those words that mean what you have written cannot disappear. Great. Thank you so much. This is really great for me. I hope it was great for you. I enjoyed thinking about this moment in time, and I appreciate your willingness to be here with me.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you. It was delightful seeing you again.
Yeah, it was a nice way to start the day.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tori.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anish. Maybe we can go on a walk on Sunday.
Sounds good.
Oh, guess what? I gotta tell you, such a delight.
I'm
So-
gonna stop recording.
Oh, that's right. Better stop the recording.